that have to be up early in the morning. So they didn't start till about midnight, and then I guess it wasn't Paul. It was Ringo. One of them said, "Could I have one of your cigarettes?" And Sue, they didn't make any money, but she had a pack of cigarettes, and she gave him one, which was worth a lot of money to her. But they spent a lot of time with him that night, and then the next day they had to get up, got it, 5 o'clock to go on their trip. So they had a good time.
It is now 12:30, so I think we'll get started. Our meeting is now called to order. And Gordon, I know that was a wimpy sounding ding, so I'll do better next time. So let me just quick pull up our slides for today's show. And I see that we have a few people in the waiting room as well. So I'll let them in momentarily. Okay. Everybody arrives right at 12:30, looks like. So just give me a second if you would. Let's see. Okay, that's amazing. 9 people all at once. Excuse me, I hate to keep you all waiting. So again, welcome to the warm and friendly Westwood Village Rotary Club. Today is Thursday, June 17th. And we have a very enjoyable agenda for today, as we were just discussing. And I haven't seen Nevin yet. Nevin was going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance from Luxembourg.
Wow.
Let's see. I apologize because I can't see everybody at once. So who will volunteer to take Nevin's place to lead us in the pledge?
Does anybody know the Pledge of Allegiance from Luxembourg?
Okay, you can do it, Gordon, if you would.
All right. Place your right hand over your left heart and say with me, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
Of
And
America.
to the republic which stands one nation
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you for pitch hitting for us. And Ron Leister, I understand that you will be sharing the thought for the day.
I will. I'm sorry my webcam isn't working, so I'm on a telephone today, but we'll make do. In honor of today's guest speaker and her topic, Thanks for the Beatles, I thought I'd share a couple of quotations from each of them. And we could start with Paul McCartney. Music is like a psychiatrist. You can tell your guitar things you can't tell people, and it will answer you with things people can't tell you. I am alive and well and unconcerned about the rumors of my death. But if I were dead, I'd be the last to know.
Very good.
Here are a couple from George Harrison. I think people who truly can live a life in music are telling the world, you can have my love, you can have my smiles. Forget the bad parts, you don't need them. Just take the music, the goodness, because it's the very best and it's the part I give most willingly. Everyone should have themselves regularly overwhelmed by nature. Now a couple from John Lennon. There are 2 basic motivating forces, fear and love. When we are afraid, we pull back from life. We've got this gift of love, but love is like a precious plant. You can't just accept it and leave it in the cupboard or just think it's going to get on by itself. You've got to keep watering it. You've got to really look after it and nurture it. And the last two words of wisdom are from Ringo Starr. I've never really done anything to create what has happened. It creates itself. I'm here because it happened. But I didn't do anything to make it happen apart from saying yes. And last but not least, Ringo said, everything government touches turns to crap. That's it.
Oh, that's great. And how wonderful that you did such an appropriately themed set of thoughts to share with us. So great, thank you. And I'm not quite sure why this moved backwards, but we will advance it. Okay, let me just make sure. Okay, our songmeister, I think I heard him. Oh, there he is. Hi, Ed.
Hello, I'm here, yes. Okay, Monday was Flag Day, and I thought it'd be fitting to sing You're a Grand Old Flag. You're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag, and forever in peace may you wave. You're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave. Every heart beats true under red, white, and blue. There's never a boast or brag, but your old acquaintance be forgot. Keep your eye on the grand old flag. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Very good.
Thank you once again. Sorry, I'm having an uncooperative cursor issue. Very strange. Okay, let's try it over here. Whoops. Well, that's very peculiar. Okay, so now we would like to welcome our guest. We have special guest Benjamin Fisher with us today. We're always happy to see you. And is there anyone else, in addition to our speaker, who will receive an appropriate introduction shortly? That's Dr. Elizabeth Upton. So thank you for being with us. We have a few announcements. We're doing June birthdays because Steve Day informed us last week that today is Marcia's birthday, which is probably why we haven't seen him. At least I'm not seeing him. So again, the 19th is John O'Keefe's birthday. Next Thursday during our club assembly, Steve Sherrill will also celebrate his birthday. And the next day is Sharon Bradford's birthday. So happy June birthdays. And Steve, last week, you shared with us that I want to call him legendary late member Dick Littlestone passed recently. And when you look at the summary of just some of the things that he did in his lifetime, you have to say this was a life well lived. Steve, is there anything you would care to share with us about him? Steve, you're on mute.
Are you talking to me, Nancy?
Yes.
Well, I know some others in the club knew Dick well, but I did too. And I came to enjoy his friendship when we were talking about ROTC. And he was what they call the PMS of ROTC at UCLA. So as he retired from the regular Army, and he was a regular Army officer, he was in charge of the ROTC program at UCLA. And so that was a different time and place. And I also, and I know I think maybe Gordon was an ROTC guy too, I don't know, but that's the way I got my commission before I went into the Army. Colonel Littlestone, some people didn't like him very well. Some people did like him pretty well, but everyone believed that he was sincere and a hard worker, and he accomplished much, just as you mentioned, Nancy, just extraordinary accomplishments. His dedication to the work with youth and the international exchange. And I know Chris Bradford does a lot of that work now. Dick, boy, he stayed in touch with everybody who went anywhere who we sponsored. And so he was he was a good man, and Ron Leister, I know you worked with him closely and know him well, and there may be others. I bet Ron would have something he'd like to say about Colonel Dick Littlestone. And by the way, he was not a full colonel. He was a lieutenant colonel. And there you go. And
Dick Littlestone was always there for me when I needed him. One thing about Dick was he didn't care who you were. He would tell you what he thought, and that's what got him. Some people got a little bit irritated with him because he just said what he believed. And if there were a diplomacy tone in Dick Littlestone, I don't know where it was, but I really liked the man. He's, like Steve said, he gave it all and did many things very well.
By the way, I want to thank you, Ron. In case others haven't noticed, Ron posted Colonel Littlestone's obituary and the obituary of John Singleton on our website recently, if anybody wants to read more about them. So I think that's great. Thank you. And stories like this and last week, the profiles that we talked about, John Singleton last week, remind me of what a rich heritage this club has, not only a long heritage, but a very meaningful one. And so I love having the opportunity to learn about past members.
I would add, if I could, both men, Steve, I think, mentioned it, both men were intrinsically involved with a lot of the student work and the international scholars, and laid a lot of the foundation that our club continued for so many years. And Singleton, I don't know how to do it, Ron or Steve might be able to do better, but he used to always, about every other sentence, go, ah. And he hosted all the international students from the Los Angeles area, our whole district at the time, which was usually about 20-some students. He'd take skiing for 4 or 5 days to Mammoth, and I was lucky enough to work with him on some of those. And he was just fantastic with the scholars and a fantastic club member.
Oh, nice story. Thank you for sharing that.
And I may have missed the tribute to John Singleton last week early on because I joined the call later. But I wanted to just say that John Singleton was one of my great heroes in Rotary. There are probably 4 or 5 of those from the Westwood Village Rotary Club. And John Singleton was one of those people. And I'll never forget when we were doing the program in Guadalajara and we were down working with his deaf school and going through cochlear implant surgeries, the first ones that had ever been done in Mexico. And we went to Mexico and arranged for the surgeries to be done, imported surgeons and hearing professionals. And as the children were coming, some of the children were coming out of recovery, they had the cochlear implant and they had different devices that were around their ear. And John and I were seated across from some of the children. And one of the hearing experts clapped their hands like this. And to see those children for the first time in their life ever hear something and to see the look in their eye, it was overpowering. And I still remember John just crying like a baby when he saw how remarkable this project had changed the lives of those children. And I too was overcome with emotion, but I remember that man, and he was a good man, and he wasn't a perfect man, but he was an absolutely extraordinary Rotarian. And he always closed off when he said goodbye to you by saying, "Have a fabulous day."
Thank you, Steve. That's really moving. Most of you will know or remember that next week is our club assembly. It will be a special 1 hour and 15-minute meeting. It's also that very day is our club's 92nd birthday, so please feel free to have your beverage of choice handy as we toast our club's birthday. And just as exciting is that our long-range strategic planning committee will be presenting plans for our club's top priorities, and I think that we have some exciting news to share. I'm really looking forward to that. So I hope you can all be there. And also I want to remind us that we are closing out the year and observing our birthday with a special Westwood Village Rotary Club Foundation donation challenge. Please consider making a year-end donation to our foundation by June 30th. And our club is going to match the donations 2 to 1. We have enough money. The combined funds will be divided between 2 causes that will be voted on by our members during the club assembly, and I will be sending out another reminder in the meantime. And then this was a reminder as of last week, a repeat of last week, that the UCLA Air Force ROTC sword ceremony has been turned into a live event, will be held on July 6th at the Los Angeles Coliseum. We are providing the Saber of Excellence to the top graduating senior in the Air Force ROTC. So if you would like to go represent us, we would certainly welcome that. And then also, Allie is serving as our scribe again for today. So thank you very much. And by the way, I also want to mention I got an email from Chris Gaynor a while ago. He had some surgery beginning of the week. He said he is recovering, so we look forward to seeing him back with us very soon. And now I would like to ask Bill to introduce our speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Upton. Bill?
Well, thank you very much. I want to tell you we're very fortunate to have Dr. Upton speak to us. I was fortunate enough to take her class, History of the Beatles, and it was one of these classes you just never wanted to miss. It was so exciting, and she's so good at telling you the story of these guys from the time they were infants and had their diapers on practically, and then finding themselves together and their career and all the music they wrote and the words they wrote. It was terrific. She is just a marvelous speaker, and I want to tell her that I'd like to take her to lunch. As soon as we return to the faculty center, we're going to bring you over and you could have lunch with our group, and I think you would enjoy it also. So without further ado, Dr. Elizabeth Upton, thank you. We didn't lose her, did we? Let's see.
Let me see. Dr. Elizabeth Upton. She's not in the waiting room.
Maybe I didn't do a good enough introduction. Oh.
Of course, we don't know where she is or was speaking from.
Well, I got kicked off once and came back in. You know, it just got me back in. So maybe she just got kicked off for a minute.
Well, I was charmed by the fact that she joined us for a social time and spent quite a bit of time talking to us and really listening. Because a lot of our members have had experiences having seen the Beatles in person. I'm still looking for her. Bill, has she possibly emailed you?
Good. Let me look.
Well, that's that's a new one. Well, I'll share a very brief anecdote while we're waiting and hoping on a development, which is that I've lived in New York quite a lot, much of it on the Upper West Side. And I lived very close to the Dakota, which is where John Lennon and Yoko lived. And unfortunately, which is where he was also killed. But I would often see them out walking early in the morning. I'd be going to the subway to go to work, it'd be like 7:30 in the morning. And they would just be out for a walk. And the first time I saw him, I was shocked to discover how short he was. When you're seeing the Beatles, like I only saw them on television or, on recordings. This is very curious. I'm still looking for her. And he wasn't much taller than she was. But I loved the fact that they were just leading this normal life in New York and out for what seemed to be almost daily strolls. So I thought that's one of the things you love about New York. You just never know who you're going to run into. Well, I'm not seeing her. Bill, can you call her to see what happened?
As a matter of fact, I cannot call her. I never was in touch with her by phone, only by email.
Okay.
Let me see if I can send her an email.
Yes. Does anybody else have Beatles memories that they want to share?
I just changed my background if anybody's interested. This is in Liverpool.
Well, I have one, Nancy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I took a course from Elizabeth Upton, also the Beatles, in October of 2014. And it was one of the senior scholars courses. I took a number of them, music, Beethoven and Mozart, and a Shakespeare course, and then the Beatles with Elizabeth Upton. And I would say of all of the 4 that I took, this was the most rigorous and academic of all. I mean, everybody would scoff at the Beatles. That must have been just a lot of fun, and it was, but it was a very difficult course.
She said her monitor died. I'm setting up my laptop right now. So.
Oh, okay. So we'll give her a few minutes to do that. She can also call in if she needs to. So, well, that's a new one. You just never know with technology, at least if somebody's in the same room with you. There are fewer things that can go wrong. So we'll look forward to our live meetings. Pardon me?
We always had AV issues at the faculty center.
Well, isn't that the truth? That is true. That is, you're absolutely right.
One of our legacies, huh?
My only Beatles memory when we were little is my father taught English. So we moved around started in California to Saudi Arabia and Japan. And my brother was a drummer. So he would set up his books around and play the Beatles and just with chopsticks until he got his drumsticks, just beat on the.
Oh goodness, how imaginative. And I had no idea you had lived in all those different places growing up. That's fascinating.
I have one Beatles story. It's a Ringo Starr story, and it's long after their heyday. It was about 1991 or 1992. And my daughter and my husband and I were at a restaurant, a Russian restaurant actually, having dinner. And this big party comes in, like about 20 people. We saw where the table had been set up. And Ringo Starr was one of the people in that party to come in. They were celebrating somebody's birthday.
Oh, cute.
And my husband and I were both going, oh my God, we're talking is that Ringo Starr? Is that Ringo Starr? To each other under our breath. And our daughter was looking at us like we were like verklempt, and everything. And we were trying to explain to her that when we were about 14 or 15 or 16, there's no possible way he could have walked into a restaurant to celebrate a birthday party with some, friends or family or whatever, because they were so huge, they would have just been mobbed or what.
Yes.
There we go.
Oh, there she is. Yay. Welcome back.
She's on mute.
You're on mute, Elizabeth.
Dr. Upton, you're on mute.
Sorry, my monitor died, and I'm now trying to connect up to my laptop.
You recovered quickly, and we were sharing anecdotes among ourselves.
Oh
We
God,
figured-
I don't know what to. Yeah, so now I'm on my phone. I'm trying to log on with my laptop, but I haven't turned it on since last March. And so it's saying I need to update my drivers and I need to reconnect to UCLA. And I don't know what to do. Oh shoot, I'm so sorry. This has literally never happened before.
Don't be sorry. It happens to all of us, and we're glad you're here.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
I'm sorry you all have to witness my monitor. My monitor says it doesn't have a signal. I don't know why it doesn't have a signal.
Honestly,
it should have a
Dr.
signal.
Upton, this is just classic rotary speaker technology. We were just talking about this. Like, I asked Dr. Ann Coscarelli when I was president, and I kept telling her there's an AV ghost, like something technical will happen. Like, oh no, not to me. I've uploaded this 3 different times. There's no way anything technical is going to happen to me. And she came into the faculty center and like everything just died on her laptop. And she was like, this has never happened before. And I'm like, the power is strong. So it's not you. Don't worry.
I'm trying to see if I can get anything to work because it's not letting me turn on my email. So that's a problem. That's why I checked with my phone. I have slides, I have videos, I have all sorts of things. What is my Office 65 password? I don't know what my Office 65 password is.
What do you think? We should start singing Beatles music and just get it in the room?
Yeah.
So Nancy, I have a question for Dr. Upton.
Okay, please.
So,
hello.
Hi, we're really pleased you're with us today.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, what is the one thing that you wanted us to take away from your presentation today? One thing about what you do and what you were going to be talking to us about today that you wanted each of us to take away.
Well, I had several points. It's always hard to boil things down to one point. That's a good exercise.
Well, maybe 2 would be good too.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to tell you about how I teach the class and what I think is important there. In a way, all of the GE classes that we teach in musicology are some variety of what used to be called music appreciation. So we teach vocabulary for identifying elements in music and then thinking about how composers were creating things and what performers are doing and especially what listeners are doing. I like to put the listeners in the center of what I'm doing because people will tell us, will say, oh, I'm not musical, I don't play an instrument, but everybody listens to music. And so recognizing that without any listeners, there isn't any music. So recognizing what it is that listeners are up to is something that I really want my students to get. Then I was going to talk about how the Beatles teach really well for this kind of class. And then I was going to walk you through some of that and maybe it'll still work. My monitor died. And I can't log on to my email with my laptop because I don't remember what my Office 65 password is. 365. Anyway, yeah. So how to put listeners in the picture and how to recognize and to have people whose engagement with music is as listeners recognize that that's really important. That's really important. So I think that would be what would be central. And then I want to talk a little bit about how I do that. So
would that be like, just being in tune with their fans?
Oh, Okay, so in the classical music model is that composers create a work of music and hand it over to the performers, and the performers perform it, and the listeners hear that. And so it's only in one direction. And one thing that's interesting about the Beatles is that they wrote their own music and they were the performers. So they're doing both of those steps, and their listeners, they were listening to other kinds of music. That's what was inspiring them. So those of us who don't write music can listen to what other people are doing. And the more that we have an idea of how it works, how composers are producing effects, what sorts of things go into a particular recording, a particular piece, then it's just more interesting and more fun. Than instead of just being like background noise, you can actually follow along with how a piece of music works. It's not that difficult to start to get the words to recognize what you're listening to and being able to identify things that you're listening to. And I think it's I think everybody should get the chance to do that. I think it should be taught in high schools, but since it's not, I'm perfectly glad to do it in college. What else? So being responsive to fans. Yeah, so people think of the cascade as going just from composers, here I have a little finger, down to performers, down to listeners. But the composers know what the listeners are looking for. They know what the listeners are going to be doing, what situations they're going to be listening to music, and they take that into account. So for the Beatles, for example, when they were first writing music, when they were just starting as recording artists, they thought that, when they first started writing, they thought that they would be writing songs for other people. They thought they would be songwriters. The idea of being a rock star hadn't been invented yet. So they thought they'd be writing songs and other people would write them. So their earlier songs are kind of generic. They're not about their own feelings. They're about common situations of feeling in love, feeling hopeful, feeling rejected, whatever, that would resonate, they thought, with the teenagers who would be listening to this kind of music. They wrote a lot of songs that have you in the title in their first two albums. You know, From Me to You, thinking about you, because they wanted to have that sense of communication with the mostly young women who were going to be listening to them. They liked girls very much, and I forget which one it was said when asked, why did you get into music? And they said, we wanted to meet girls and make a lot of money, and they managed to do both of them. So, but yeah, their first songs, they don't start out with things like I Am the Walrus. They start out with From Me to You, or She Loves You, or I Want to Hold Your Hand. These kind of direct communication. They know who their audience is and they want to talk to them. I wonder, I mean, I'll talk to you more now, but I wonder if you can invite me back when I get a new monitor or whatever. I'd be glad to show you stuff. Oh God, this has never happened. I am so sorry.
I wanted to ask you a quick question.
Okay.
Pet Sounds by Brian Wilson, I heard was the impact for Sgt. Pepper. It was one of them. You had just mentioned influences from other people. Yeah. And could you talk about what, probably you covered in your course, I would think, but can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah.
So yeah, the Beatles definitely were listening to what other people were doing, just as other people were listening to what they were doing. And in before they started work on Sgt. Pepper, so Sgt. Pepper came out in the summer of '67, and in the summer of '66 they had their last tour, and it was not fun at all. They had all sorts of not pleasant experiences, and after playing their last concert at Candlestick Park in San Francisco, they said, "That's it. We're not going on tour anymore. It's just too much. It's just too much trouble." And so when they were in San Francisco, they had met other musicians and bands who were there. And Paul McCartney later also came to visit here in later '66 in Los Angeles. And one thing they got from San Francisco bands for Sgt. Pepper was that the San Francisco bands at the time were giving themselves all of these really outrageously complicated names. So instead of the Animals or the Beatles or whatever, they were things like Quicksilver Messenger Service or Big Brother and the Holding Company. And they thought, and the Beatles thought that was great. So part of the conception for Sgt. Pepper was that they could pretend to be somebody else. They could come up with the name of another band and pretend to be this other band, and then it would take some of the pressure off them from having to be the Beatles. In terms of Brian Wilson, they were very impressed with Pet Sounds, particularly for how Brian Wilson and people in the studio were producing the sound to be almost to be not just here are the instruments, here's the voices, but to have everything mixed and edited so that it almost sounds symphonic. You have this wide range of different instrumental sounds. You have wide range of voices, and it's all arranged not just straightforward, but almost like painting with sound. They were very impressed with that, and that was one of the things that in making Sgt. Pepper they thought, "Ooh, we want to try that too." And because they no longer had to write music that they would be able to perform live in sports arenas, they could do much more subtle things in the studio because they would not be called upon to perform them live. Nowadays, with synthesizers and with other electronic things, you can perform all of those things live. You can do that live, but not in '67. They couldn't do that. But yeah, what they really appreciated was just like the symphonic breadth how the Beach Boys were using their voices, how they were using instrumental sounds to really make these full settings of each of the songs. They're very impressed with that.
That was thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Excellent answer.
Thank you. I don't actually go into that. I don't go into that much in my class, but sometimes I've had TAs do guest lectures, and one of them gave a great guest lecture on the Beach Boys and on the interaction between the two bands. So I learned a lot from that.
Interesting. John, you had your hand up.
I took your class in October of 19, I don't remember the date now exactly. I think it was, anyway, I don't remember the date. 2014, I took your class. I remember you talking about when the Beatles decided to break up. Can you go into that dynamic a little bit? What brought that about and the like?
Yeah, it was a lot of different things. And partly it was that just like no one had invented being a rock star until they did it, there were a lot of things about managing life as a rock star that they didn't have any idea how to do, and other people have learned from them. It makes me really sad, because if it had just occurred to them to say, hey, you know what, let's take a break, see you in a year, I think they would all have had some time to decompress. When their manager Brian Epstein had died in '67, it made things difficult, and they thought, oh, well, we can just manage ourselves. And the fact is they can't, because doing all the business arrangements and being a manager and was something that is a job in itself. And they were musicians, so they were trying to deal with everything on their own, and it wasn't working. So that was enormously frustrating. They had a big argument. The proximate thing that led to them breaking up was that they were arguing. They agreed that they needed a manager who was not them. They needed to hire someone outside. And John Lennon spoke to different people, and so he wanted to hire a man named Alan Klein, who was, I think he was doing the business management for the Stones at the time, the Rolling Stones, and some others. And he said, okay, I've done the research and let's do this. And that's normally how things worked. It was John started the band when he was in high school, and he was like, they didn't have a single leader in how they were playing music, but in running things, there was a sense that John was the leader. And so he did this, and he expected everyone to just say, yes, that's great. Well, Paul I don't remember if he was married at this point or just about to be married. Anyway, he married a lawyer's daughter. So Linda Eastman, Paul's father-in-law, what's his name? Eastman, I'm forgetting. Anyway, he was a lawyer in New York, and they did arts representation, and Linda's brother was a lawyer in New York. And so when they thought we need to get an outside manager, Paul talked to the Eastmans. So he had a different idea. So when John said, let's go with this guy, Paul said, wait a second, let's talk about this other thing. How about my brother-in-law? I think he would do a great job. And so there was nobody had ever told John no. Nobody had ever said, if John had an idea, the answer is always, yep, that's great, let's do it. And so that challenge to his authority was not appreciated. Another thing that was happening is, as I said, Paul got married. John got remarried. His divorce came through with his first wife, Cynthia, and he married Yoko. And they basically, I wish that they had just thought to say, let's take a break so that they could like have some time to live their lives and then come back to work. But they'd been in this mindset since they started that they'd had this enormous success with Beatlemania, and no one knew how long it was going to last. And so the mindset that they had was, we got to do as much as we can because we're the flavor of the month, and everyone will like somebody else next. Well, the thing is, nobody ever stopped liking them, but they didn't know that was going to happen. So they were releasing 2 albums a year for the first few years, which is crazy. And they needed a break. The Rolling Stones learned from this. They've taken bunches of breaks. They're still performing. Mick Jagger's a great grandfather, and they're still performing because they do things like say, okay, see you in 3 years. We're gonna take a hiatus from each other and get back to it. So John was the first to decide that this wasn't working, and he thought that they should stop being Beatles. But he agreed not to say anything because they still had music that they were recording and releasing. And he knew that once they said that they were breaking up, that would be the only story. No one would pay any attention to what music they were doing. And so they all started, well, not Ringo, the other 3 started working on solo albums on their own, in their own recording studios. And the word got out. Paul said something in a press release when his first solo album was going to be released that since they were breaking up, and John was furious that because they thought that they would manage this together to say when was it going to break up. A lot of bad feelings, a lot of how we know about bad feelings come from 2 sources. One is from interviews that John did in 1970 and in the early 70s, when he was enormously angry with Paul, who after all had been his best friend since he was 17. He got over it. They made up their friendship, and it's nice to know that while they didn't work together again, they were back to speaking with each other and seeing each other. John and Yoko moved to New York, and whenever Paul was in New York, he would see them. And that just makes me happy. Where was I going with this? Oh, the other thing that we got bad feelings from was the footage for what became the film Let It Be. So the idea of Let It Be was that they would make a new recording, and they would document the whole process of rehearsing and recording and everything, because people were interested in that. And they called it the Get Back Project. And the idea was that they would get back to playing live as a band instead of doing all of the work in the studio that they'd had so much fun with. And they weren't satisfied with how it turned out. And so after they put that aside, and then they agreed to work with George Martin again and produce a regular album. And the thought was, and this is going to be the last album. So they made Abbey Road after they had recorded all the material for what became Let It Be. Abbey Road ends with a song called The End, but nobody knew that that's what they were saying until afterwards. So after they broke up, they didn't want to look at this material. They didn't want to talk to anything. They needed a break. And so John Lennon hired Phil Spector, actually, to take the recordings that they'd made for the Get Back project and turn it into an album. And I don't remember who, see, I need to check my notes, who was the director, but they cut the footage in a way that emphasized them disagreeing. And that was not all what was going on. It's very exciting. Right now, the film director from New Zealand, Peter Jackson, who made the Lord of the Rings films, he got the job of, he was hired to look through all of the Get Back footage and re-edit a movie from it. So not to remake Let It Be, but to say what else was there. And it was supposed to come out in December, but there's a global pandemic. So it's been postponed, but this is on the horizon, and watch for it. And he released in the winter, this past winter, it's not a trailer for the film because they're still working on it, but he released a little film of the kind of material that he was finding. And it's all incredibly cheerful. And it shows them getting along and like hugging each other and playing together and just being playful and really relaxed with each other, which is not what the movie Let It Be felt like. So I think when we see the new Get Back project film, probably by the end of this year, it will change the story of how nasty the breakup was. It was not pleasant, but I don't think it was as murderous as we've been led to believe. That was a long answer. Did that help? Did I get round to it?
That was very good. Thank you. Very insightful. Thank you.
Technology has failed me. So if you want to ask me more questions, or if you want me to come back on another day, let me know.
Or both. Gordon,
Or both.
you have and then John again.
Maybe a little bit off the track, but I'm curious to know, is there a path between the music of the later Middle Ages and the Beatles?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. I wasn't aware of it when I started research in musicology, but the link is love songs. The link is love songs, and so with medieval music, most of the music that has survived from the European Middle Ages is church music, because they invented the recording technology. They invented music notation, and so a lot of what got written down was stuff they needed for church services. First, the Gregorian chant. And then as composers began to write music in parts, polyphony, they were writing down music that would be used for church services. Eventually, people said, oh, hey, we can use this tool to write down other kinds of music. And so we get tunes for troubadours and trouvères in the 12th and 13th century. We get polyphony starting in the 13th century. That's music in parts, music in more than one part. And so in musicology, they call this secular music, worldly music or whatever. And it hasn't been given the same respect as the church music. That's been seen as really central. And when I started graduate school, part of what was motivating me was just how wonderful I thought the songs, particularly the 14th and 15th century, were. I recognized them as songs. And what I hadn't realized at that time was that was definitely because I was a little kid in the 60s. I was like older and then went to high school in the 70s. But I had a clock radio in my room from when I was 5 years old, and I listened to top 40 radio. And so that was in mid 60s. That's a golden age of love songs, a golden age of popular music. And so my sense of what a song was came from, even though I didn't know about it because I was 5, 6, something like that. Came from the Beatles and the people who were following them. And so then when I was listening to and studying the music from France and Italy from the 14th and 15th centuries, I recognized things. There was something song-like that, even though it was centuries ago, you could recognize it. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about what was it I was hearing? What were they doing then that is what people do with songs? My dissertation was on a particular manuscript of music and studying that. But my first book was about thinking about 15th century song from the perspectives of performers and listeners, and seeing what kinds of structures were they doing around 1400 that we still do. you still have sections, verses that repeat, and you still have like things that repeat and then a contrasting section, so that the listeners are like, you hear the first part and then you hear it repeat with new words. You're like, oh, I know what this is. I know where this is going. And then you hear a contrasting section and you're like, whoa, I don't know what that was. This was a nice surprise. And then you come back to what the original verses were. And that makes it feel really satisfying. And European musicians seem to have figured this out by around 1300. So of how to structure a 4-minute song. And that just amazes me that, you know, that's just like, yay, humans. But that's what the connection is.
Marcia, you have your hand up, and then John.
I was just going to ask if you knew, I've heard like several stories, but when they first came out with I Want to Hold Your Hand and stuff, they had the little page boy haircut, all 4 of them. How did that come about? I've heard several stories, so I was wondering what the real story is.
So starting in 1960, they were hired to play in clubs in Hamburg. A bunch of Liverpool suddenly had this homegrown music scene, and it was very exciting. And one German producer, German club owner actually, who came to England, met up with someone from Liverpool who said, you got to hear these groups. And so hired several of them, including the Beatles. So the Beatles went to, and they're young at this point. I mean, in 1960, John and Ringo are 20 and Paul and George are younger than that. So they're very young. They go to Germany and they're playing for hours every day in bars, basically. So one day, someone, an art student, so a college student, was in that area and heard the music and walked in and thought, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard in my life. And so the next day he brought 2 of his friends with him. And so the 3 of them just started showing up every single day. So they're like about the same age as the Beatles, a little older, these 3 German art students, Ingrid Kirscher, Klaus, oh God, what's his name? I'm just having a brain freeze. Anyway, 3 nice German people. And so the Beatles noticed that they were always showing up and that they were young people, not just and they dressed really cool. They thought they were really, really, really fashionable and cool people. And so they started hanging out with them. One of them, oh God, what are their names? One of them had this haircut, and he got it because it was a fashion at the University of Paris. So it was a Parisian college student look. And one of these German students thought this looked good. And then the Beatles thought, you guys look great. And so they asked, of course, John first, because he did everything first. Will you give me this kind of haircut? And so then Paul and George copied him. At the time, they were playing with a drummer called Pete Best, and Pete said no, he didn't want to cut his hair. He had this sort of Elvis hair all greased back, and he didn't want to cut it. But the others all cut their hair. So where it came from was from their friend, whose name is just Klaus somebody. Anyway, had this haircut, and he learned it from students in Paris. So that was where the chicest thing came, from Paris to Hamburg, and then that's where the Beatles got it.
That's cute. John, I think you had another question. Oh, and Mark. John and then Mark.
I did, yes. Elizabeth, I heard a lecture many years ago, more than 20 years ago, by a musicology professor from Vanderbilt, who was, his thesis of this lecture was that Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the choral symphony, the 4th movement, had some similarities to Hey Jude. Have you ever heard that? I mean, do you know?
I have never heard that.
I can't remember what the comparison was, but he thought there was a comparison there.
I'm trying to think what that might be. They're both very good pieces. The end.
Hey Jude has some spiritual connotations to it, doesn't it? Hey Jude.
Yeah. The message of Hey Jude is everything is going to be all right. It's very, very reassuring. Things seem to be difficult, but everything is going to be all right. People have interpreted the name Jude. That's the name of a saint in the Catholic Church. And so that was Paul thinking of that. Paul was thinking of John's son, Julian, and he started writing the song as Hey Jules, to say everything's going to be all right, when his parents were getting a divorce and he was a little kid. But then he depersonalized it, because he didn't want the song to be about little Julian. Everybody else didn't need to know that. So he changed it, and he might have been thinking of St. Jude when he chose that name. That's definitely a name. But the whole message of the song is everything's going to be fine. Things are going to work out. The other thing that strikes me as spiritual about Hey Jude is that long section of the na na nas, you know, na 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 na. They repeat it like 12 times. They had just been to India and they were learning to meditate. And one of the things you learn in this school of meditation is to just repeat the same phrase over and over as a way to calm your mind, so you don't start thinking about, I need to make a phone call. Did I pay that bill? I'm going to meet up with somebody later. My computer monitor just crashed. What am I going to have to do about this? So you repeat something over and over, and it just makes your mind calm down so that you can focus on what you're doing. And I really hear all those na-na-nas as being like a mantra, as being a kind of meditation that helps bring about that sense of calm focus, out of which good things are going to come.
Yeah.
But I don't know what he was saying about Beethoven.
But you know, the fourth movement of the choral symphony is the Ode to Joy.
Yeah.
Maybe everything's going to be all right, joyful, you know?
Yeah, and it talks about, the poem talks about all men are brothers, and yeah, everything is going to work out and things are going to be glorious. And that is very similar message. That's a very similar message.
Maybe that's it. I don't know.
A friend of mine teaches at Vanderbilt. I wonder who did that.
It was a male. I don't remember his name.
Yeah.
It was a man. Yeah.
Mark, you had a question? You're on mute.
Hi, Dr. Upton. Whatever happened to the fifth Beatle, Ringo's predecessor?
Pete Best. He's still alive. He's still in Liverpool. So people think, oh, it was terrible that they ditched Pete Best for Ringo. Pete wasn't really a professional drummer. He played the drums, and he had drums. His mother, in part to make life nice for Pete, opened a coffee club for teenagers in the basement of her house. They had a big house, and so she set up a club called the Jacaranda Club, of all things, like Los Angeles. And so they knew him there. He had, that he would sometimes play along with people. The early Beatles, they're really young, got bookings there. When they got the contract for Hamburg, they were just playing as a group of guitarists, and they didn't have a steady drummer. They would work with different people for different gigs. And part of the deal, the contract, was that you have to show up with your own drummer. We're not supplying a drummer. We're not supplying drums. And so they asked a bunch of people they knew, would they be willing to go to Hamburg? And most of them said no, because they had gigs in Liverpool and they didn't want to go to Germany. And they were at the end of their rope. If they didn't sign somebody, the contract was off. So they actually hired Pete the day before they left. And they played with him a little, but not a lot. And so he went with them. And it could have worked out. It could have worked out that this was like a match meant to be, but he didn't hang out with them. He didn't get a haircut. He wasn't on their wavelength or whatever. Meanwhile, Ringo was the drummer with what was probably the most successful band in Liverpool at the time, Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. And they were also playing in Hamburg. So they got to know Ringo, and Ringo had played with, once they came back to England, Ringo played with them a lot if Pete wasn't available. So, and they instantly liked him better. They thought that this was much more simpatico. But they didn't know how to tell Pete that they wanted to replace him. And finally it was taken out of their hands because George Martin said, he's just not good enough. And they said, we've got someone else. And that's when they made the switch. So, but yeah, he played with other bands in the 60s in Liverpool, and he's still around, kind of. He always looks kind of sheepish, like, yeah, I was there. Oh, well, didn't work out, whatever.
Dr. Upton, I'm just so impressed that we've been able to have this absolutely lively, delightful conversation with
That's
you without your having access to your materials. And we definitely want to have you back.
Oh, thank you so much.
We definitely love,
I think you'll like this.
and I doubt anybody's going to disagree with me on that. And if you're open to it, what we really like to do is invite you to one of our live meetings, which will be starting up again in a while. So we'll connect with you. John is our speaker chair for the coming Rotary year, which starts July 1st. So we'll be following up with you.
Yeah.
But again,
I'm not going anywhere. So.
I thank you for being such a good sport.
I'm
And
so sorry. I had lovely slides.
you had
Nancy,
nothing to apologize for. Yes.
Nancy, can I say one thing? So sometimes these off the cuff talks without any, anything prepared are actually much more sincere and much more real. So thank you for
You're very welcome.
Good
for
point.
doing this
Good
and
point.
coming through like a star.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for saying that, Phil. I totally agree.
Like a rock star.
A Ringo Starr or
A Ringo Starr.
So we thank you for being with us today, and as a token appreciation for your time and your very interesting impromptu talk, we will be making a donation to the Westwood branch of the Los Angeles Public Library in your honor.
Oh, thank you so much.
And we will definitely be in touch with you again. So thank you. Thank you for hanging in there with us.
Thank you for putting up with this. I have no idea what went wrong.
Well, sometimes things happen the way they're meant to, and this was delightful.
Oh,
Absolutely
thank you very much.
delightful. And then we get to hear you again.
Yes,
A
absolutely.
little differently. So thank you again. Have a wonderful, safe week, everyone. Next Thursday again is our club assembly. Hope to see you all there. Everyone have a safe, healthy, and happy week.
Thank you. Very good.